Good morning and welcome to my first ever What I Eat in a Week video. If you're new here, my name is Vera Greuting. I'm a permaculture gardener, designer, author and teacher, and I live in the Netherlands. Together with my husband, we tend a quarter-acre permaculture garden. And in today's video, I want to show you what eating homegrown looks like for us in a cool climate in December. Last week we filmed a harvest video where I showed you all the produce that we can get fresh from the garden in December. But apart from that, we also have some things stored at home. We have lots of winter squash, some apples still, quince, sweet potatoes. We have dried herbs. We also preserve some things, not much, because I'm more a fan of harvesting fresh produce even during the cold months. So I have some chutneys, I have grape jelly and some confiture. The reason why we only harvest once a week during the winter month is that the garden is about 5 kilometers or 3 miles away from our home. And because it gets dark so early at this moment, we only get to go during the weekend. So I have to harvest produce for usually the whole week. In my harvest video, I mentioned there is a kind of rhythm to my harvesting. I usually start with the most robust vegetables like roots and then progress to the most tender ones, the leaves and the leafy vegetables and herbs. And when it comes to cooking and using up the produce, it's the other way around. I try to use the leafy vegetables first and I progress to the roots. And at the end of the week, when the fresh harvest is gone, then there's always winter squash in the pantry. At this moment, our household consists of 3 people. It's me and my husband and our 18-year-old son. I'm vegetarian. The guys are not, but since it's me cooking most of the time, they are mostly vegetarian as well. And this video is, I think, a good representation of the way we generally eat. All the dishes are vegetarian and some of them are vegan as well. As I mentioned, this is my first cooking kind of video, so it's the first time that we filmed in our kitchen. It's a real kitchen, it's tiny, it's not made for filming, and it's also poorly lit, especially now in December. So I apologize for that, but I hope you will enjoy the video nonetheless. So now let's get to the dishes that we ate this week. Let's start with breakfast. We often eat porridge for breakfast during the winter because we like warming foods. And I like to top porridge with some fruit. In this case, it's chopped apples, but sometimes I make things like quince compote. And I also like to use warming spices. In this case, it was a speculaas mix. Now let's move on to the dinners. For dinner on Saturday we had a tofu stir fry with pak choi greens and carrots. And for that I used the pak choi that I harvested from the greenhouse that was running to seed. And also some tatsoi leaves and of course the carrots from the garden as well. And first I had to give everything a good wash because that's what you need to do when you use homegrown produce that has not been pre-washed for the supermarket. That obviously always adds some time to the meal prep. I stir-fried some carrots with garlic and ginger and spring onion. Then I added cubed tofu, gave everything a good stir, and seasoned it with sesame seed oil, mirin, and soy sauce. Lastly, I added all the greens and covered the pan with a lid so that they would wilt and boil down a bit. That just takes a few minutes because the greens are fast to cook. I served the stir fry with white rice, but you could of course obviously also use whole grain if you prefer that. And then I added a good portion of the tofu and vegetables, and I garnished the dish with some of the pak choi flowers. Dinner number 2, our Sunday dinner, was buckwheat pancakes with chard, garlicky mushrooms, and goat cheese. I picked a big bunch of chard in the garden for this, and at home I stripped the leaves from the stalks. You can use the stalks for other dishes. Sometimes I add them to soups, for example, but you could do other stuff with them. And again, I had to wash the leaves thoroughly. There's always a lot of grit on the greens from the garden. And I like to make sure they're clean, obviously, so usually I wash them twice. Then I made the batter for the pancakes. I used just buckwheat flour, not a mix of all-purpose and buckwheat. I prefer just buckwheat with eggs and milk and water. Then I stir-fried some chestnut mushrooms in a hot pan with a bit of olive oil. And when they were a bit browned, I added some finely chopped garlic and chopped thyme, and I seasoned them with salt and pepper. Then I roughly chopped the chard before adding it to the same pan and letting it wilt. I don't wash the pan in between. Then it was time to make the pancakes, and I like to use this handy tool that makes sure that you can spread the batter evenly and have a bit better pancakes. Buckwheat pancakes are a bit tricky. They break easily because the flour is not as elastic, I guess. Then to serve, I put some wilted chard on top of every pancake. And the chard was, of course, also seasoned with some salt and pepper. Then I added some of the mushrooms that were fried with garlic and thyme. And lastly, I added some crumbled goat cheese on top before rolling the pancake up. And again, as I said, buckwheat flour is a bit tricky, so they break a bit, but they don't taste any less delicious because of that. And then for dessert, I like to have a sweet pancake. So I made one with our homemade wild blueberry preserve. It's a preserve that my mother picked the blueberries this summer and we made the preserve together. And it's a great combination with the buckwheat flour as well. Then on Monday we had leek tart with some mixed garden greens and a beetroot, carrot and apple salad. First I made the dough with a mix of whole wheat and all-purpose flour, some chilled butter, a bit of salt of course, and a bit of cold water. And I brought everything together quickly because you don't want the butter to melt, so you have to work quite quickly. Then I rolled it out thinly and used the dough to line a removable bottom tart pan before trimming off the excess dough. Then I put the tart shell in the fridge to chill before I had my filling ready. I had a bit of dough left over, so I used it to make little gem tarts and filled these with the remaining wild blueberry preserve that I had left from yesterday, and I topped them with little stars because it's almost Christmas and it looks cute. Then I washed the leeks. I cut through the top part so that I can wash out all the grit, because this is where usually more scent will be. I sliced the leeks. I do not slice them very thinly. And I also use most of the top part, the dark green part, which is often thrown away. Then I added the leeks to a pan with heated olive oil. And once they went and sauteed them, and once they were wilted a bit, I added some finely chopped garlic and thyme. Meanwhile, I pre-baked the tart shell, which was lined with parchment paper and filled with baking beans. And then I made the custard. I broke 3 eggs into a dish and added about half a cup of cream. And of course, I also seasoned it with salt and pepper. And then I whisked everything together really well. Once the tart shell was pre-baked, I filled it with the sauteed leeks and poured over the custard. And then I added I crumbled a piece of blue cheese over the top and put the tart back in the oven. Then I made the salad by grating some carrots, beetroot and apple. And to that I added a squeeze of lemon juice and a bit of olive oil. Very simple. Then I plated everything up, also with some mixed garden greens. And like I said, for dessert we had the little gem tarts. On Tuesday we had lentil salad with mixed roasted root vegetables, blue cheese and hazelnuts. And first I chopped all the root vegetables, the carrots, some of our homegrown purple sweet potatoes. I used the tiny ones for this dish, some beautiful dikioja striped beet, but also regular red beets. And I put everything in a roasting pan, drizzled it with olive oil and seasoned with salt and pepper before mixing it with my hands so that all the veggies would be coated and seasoned. And then I put it in a preheated oven at 200 degrees. Then I made the dressing with olive oil, balsamic vinegar, and some Dijon mustard, and of course a bit of salt and pepper as well. And I mixed the dressing really well together. Then I finally chopped half a red onion and mixed that with a bit of about half of the dressing. And I also added a bit of orange, freshly squeezed orange juice for some more flavor. I added the lentils, and I also chopped quite a bit of flat leaf parsley to add to the salad. You can never have too many greens. Then also, for a bit even more flavor, I added some of our homegrown sun-dried or dried tomatoes that we preserved in sunflower oil. For serving, I topped the lentils with a bit of each of the roasted root vegetables, the sweet potatoes, beets and carrots. And then I added some chopped hazelnuts and a bit of the blue cheese that I had left over from yesterday. On Wednesday we had butternut squash and chickpea curry with naan bread and some of our homemade quince cranberry chutney. First I peeled a butternut squash and then cut it in cubes, quite large cubes. I don't want them to be too small, about an inch maybe, a little less than an inch probably. Then I sauteed some chopped onion, chopped garlic and minced ginger, fresh ginger. Then I added the cubed butternut squash and also some spices, turmeric and curry powder, and I stirred everything well before adding the cooked chickpeas, which I pre-soaked the previous night and then cooked them in the morning. And then I added a can of coconut milk and about the same amount of water. And I let everything simmer for about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. And then I prepared my Tuscan kale. I removed the stems again and roughly chopped it before adding it to the curry. And I covered the pan with a lid so that the greens could cook down, but that does not take long, only about maybe 5 minutes. And then your curry is ready. For serving, to each portion I added some of our homemade quince and cranberry chutney because I really like the taste, the sweet and sour taste of chutneys with curry. They provide a nice contrast, I think. And I garnished every bowl with some flat leaf parsley. You could of course also use coriander, but we don't have that anymore in the garden. And then we served it with naan. Next day we had some pasta with creamy cabbage and radicchio salad. And for that I cut my cabbage in quarters and I removed the stem, which is very hard. I either compost that or just eat it raw. And I thinly sliced the cabbage, not that thinly, but quite thinly, before adding it to a pan with olive oil. And once it was wilted a bit, I added chopped thyme, and once it was cooked and a bit browned, I added the rest of the cream that I had left over from the leek tart. And that's it. Meanwhile, I cooked my pasta, drained it in a colander, and then added it to the creamy cabbage and stirred everything together, of course, seasoned with salt and pepper, and then I added some freshly ground Parmesan cheese, which together with the cream it makes a nice sauce. I wanted some salad and I had some radicchio from the garden and a bit of the dressing left over from the lentil salad, so that made for a very quick and easy salad. And it's also really nice when you have such a creamy pasta dish to have the bitter radicchio leaves on the side, I think. Then on the last day I made winter squash soup with sage and also a winter squash cake. For that I used one of my mystery squashes. If you've seen my winter squash harvest video, then you'll know which one I mean. I cut it in half and then I used a spoon to remove the seeds. No need to throw these away. You can rinse them and roast them with a bit of salt and olive oil. I put the winter squash in a preheated oven at about 190 to 200 degrees, and about 40 minutes later it was done. I checked this by piercing it with a knife, and then I removed it from the oven. And I removed the skin, the peel, which was very easy in this case, and I put the winter squash in a bowl and I mashed it with a potato masher. Then I got on with the cake. I used all-purpose flour and rye flour, some baking soda and baking powder, and 2 teaspoons of specula's spice mix, and also a pinch of salt for the dry ingredients, and I mixed everything together. And for the liquid ingredients, I mixed sugar with half a cup of olive oil, half a cup of yogurt and milk, and 2 eggs, and a teaspoon of vanilla. And then again I mixed everything together really well before adding 1 cup of the winter squash puree to this, and again mixing well. Then I added the liquid ingredients to the dry mix, to the flour mix, and I stirred everything. You don't want to overmix, so just stir until combined. And then I put that in a cake pan which was greased and lined. The bottom was lined with parchment, and I put this in the oven. And then I got on, while the cake was in the oven, I've baked it for about 50 minutes. I started on my soup and I needed some sage, so I stepped outside because I have a sage plant literally growing on my doorstep. I needed about 3 sprigs. It's really convenient to have herbs at hand when you want to use them. I peeled and cut 2 of our potatoes in cubes, and then I added some olive oil to a large pan, then the potatoes and some of the sage, about 6 leaves say. You don't have to be that precise with soup. I stirred everything, and then I added about half a can of tomatoes. You could add more, but I prefer just a small amount, and all the rest of the winter squash puree. I seasoned it with salt and some freshly ground pepper before adding some boiling water, and then I let everything simmer for about 20 minutes. It's a really quick soup. And once it's done, then I put it in the blender and blend until smooth. And for garnish, I heat a bit of olive oil, to which I add the rest of the sage leaves, and I just wait till they crisp up and the oil is scented with sage. And then to serve, on every serving I put some of the sage leaves and a bit of the oil, and I finish with freshly ground pepper. And then for dessert we had the cake, which is really simple but really delicious. It keeps for about 3 to 5 days. So this was our week in homegrown meals. I hope you maybe found some inspiration here and that you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to see more of how we use our homegrown produce, there are hundreds of recipes on my website grown2cook.com. Also, if you have other ideas for using winter produce, please share them in the comments. Since this is my last video of 2020, I would also like to thank you for the support, for the likes and all the kind comments. And despite everything going on in the world, I wish you a happy holiday and see you in the new year. Happy gardening and happy eating.